The OPP, Ontario Provincial Police, work across this province out of 165 detachments. In many smaller communities, they are the local police force. And for some northern cities and towns, the cost of that has become a big problem. With us now to explain, in the northwestern Ontario community of Sioux Lookout, Mayor Doug Lawrence and Darlene Ange-Koneb, board chair of the Sioux Lookout Police Services Board. And about 200 kilometers south of there, in Fort Frances, Ontario, Mayor of the City of Kenora, Daniel Reynard. Hello to you all.
Morning.
Good morning.
Good morning.
Looking forward to this conversation because I think this isn't something that we've been hearing a lot in the media as we approach the election. Just to set up our conversation, the municipalities of Kenora, Pickle Lake, and Sioux Lookout have agreed to form a coalition to address the cost of policing in your communities. Mayor Reynard, how did this coalition come to be?
Well, what's happened over the years is we've attacked the problem individually. Municipalities, Sioux Lookout has they reached out to us and suggested that we work collectively. And when we went through it, it just seemed like the best case scenario. We were the three outliers. We were the three communities that, are way above the provincial averages. So it just made more sense that we work together.
And Mayor Lawrence, what are some of your concerns?
Well, the high policing cost per property is the primary concern. We've been working for 8 years with the province on that. It's as Mayor Reynard said, we are outliers in the province in terms of cost by factors of 2.5, 3.5, 4.5 times on the cost per property. The policing formula the cost formula needs to be addressed to unburden outlier communities such as Pickle Lake, Kenora, and Sioux Lookout.
That is a huge difference. Sheldon, if you could bring this board up, I'm just going to read a little bit. It says the three municipalities estimate that the cost of police services has taken $30 million more from their communities than they should have had to pay. Darlene, the media release stated that the three communities have the highest OPP costs in Ontario. Where does the high policing costs come from?
I believe the high policing costs may come from the number of calls for service. I think that's so far what I know anyway. And because our police detachment also serves some First Nation communities, not just Sioux Lookout, so there are high costs to the travel and the cost of anything up north is more than what the cost is in the south.
And Mayor Lawrence, I'm guessing that money could go to other things that are desperately needed in those municipalities?
Absolutely. And I'd just like to add to what Darlene said about the calls for service. All three of our communities act as hub communities for First Nation communities. In fact, between Kenora, Pickle Lake, and Sioux Lookout, we're the primary service hub for 33%, one third of the 133 First Nations in Ontario. That is the hub nature is huge. When you think about a hub, Sioux Lookout is a hub for 33 First Nations, and they fly in and out of our community. We're the busiest airport in the world is Atlanta, and the per capita as a hub, the per capita flights in and out of Atlanta, 75 million for 6 million, or 12.5 per capita per year for the base population. Toronto plus the island airport is 8. Sioux Lookout is 30. Passenger movements per year per capita base population. Kenora and Pickle Lake are hubs in their own way. So that really is driving the policing costs and the calls for service, as Darlene said, in our municipalities.
And Mayor Reynard, Mayor Lawrence mentioned the fact that these communities are hubs, meaning, I guess, that people from other communities are coming into your municipalities and accessing those services. The province introduced the OPP cost formula in 2015, which has been working for certain cities and towns. But what makes it ineffective for your municipalities?
It's interesting that you point out that it works. The current formula does work for the majority of communities that receive OPP policing. Our three communities, the reasons why our costs are so high, they're driven by calls for service. And again, as Mayor Lawrence pointed out, people come into our communities for healthcare, for the court system. There's so many reasons why they come in. And it creates, we've got this a formula that's based on per household, but our population is actually far exceeds the number of people that, you know, this formula is based on, the households it's based on. So when you start getting an example would be our calls for service are based on, they take the total for the province and then they allocate those costs based on your calls for service. So for the entire province, we pay 2.74% of all the calls for service. Our calls for service come out well over $600 per household. The provincial average for the entire bill for most municipalities is at just over the $300 range. So that's what really drives the three of our costs exceedingly is the calls for service. And that's what, again, what I use the word outliers. That's what pushes us so far above the norm.
And Darlene?
Yes, just to give you an idea, here in Sioux Lookout, the hub, as we call it, there are about 33, 34, I think, First Nations in the area. So they come here for health services, dental services, whatever, optometrist services. They also come here for education. The kids come here for school. And so we have a lot of people who are moving through Sioux Lookout, not necessarily living here sometimes, but coming here for a short time. And we cover Treaty 3, Treaty 9, Treaty 5 areas. And I'm sure in Kenora they have about the same number, probably about 28 communities that come through their city. So that's just to give you an idea of the number of First Nation communities that are being served by some of these areas, including Pickle Lake. Yeah.
Well, we reached out to the Office of the Solicitor General on this issue, and they've given us a statement as response. I'd like to read that. They write, "We are currently reviewing court security costs, including the costs of transportation, which are among costs billed to municipalities. Notably, when implemented in 2015, the current billing model brought costs down for municipalities. For all 3 municipalities detailed in the media release, the costs under the previous billing model were higher than the current estimated policing costs for 2022. Mayor Lawrence, I want to come to you. How would you respond to that? What's the outcome that you're hoping to get from the province?
Well, what the Solicitor General's office said is in part true, that when they introduced the new police cost model for OPP municipalities in 2015, it brought up the cost for some municipalities. There's a base cost, which is about 50% of most municipalities' bill, which is $178 per property. And then the next biggest cost for us is calls for service. There are court security costs, prisoner transportation costs, and some other miscellaneous costs. But the calls for service for Kenora, Pickle Lake, and Sioux Lookout are disproportionately higher. They're by a factor of, on the calls for service alone, it's 3-4 times higher than an average municipality. So there needs to be a discount of some kind for hub communities such as ourselves. It's an unfair burden to the tax base that we have.
Mayor Reynard, Mayor Lawrence just said it's an unfair tax burden to the people who are paying these taxes. How do you respond to the response that we had from the Solicitor General?
Well, when the Solicitor General's office, let's be right up front here. The system works except for our 3 municipalities. So what we're looking for is an equitable system. When the quote about the costs drop down but since that time, our costs have been driven up because these high costs of service. And I'll give you an example of the financial impact of the city of Kenora. Our total tax levy, the money we generate from our municipal tax bill, is just over $28 million. We pay out to the OPP $6.7 million. That represents 25%. 1 in every $4 that we collect goes to the provincial police. If we were at a fair and equitable system where they found a way to, don't change the system, just find a way to make it equitable for our 3 communities. That if we were at the provincial average, we would bring in the $4 million that would go out to the OPP, that portion would go into, fixing our roads. We have 17 bridges, and 8 of them that were downloaded through the provincial downloading. Like we can take those dollars and move them into services that support and enhance our community.
You've said that, you've mentioned it twice now, that the system doesn't work the way it is for your municipalities, and you've called yourselves outliers. What do you think that the province isn't understanding when we do talk about what's happening in your communities? Mayor Lawrence?
I think they do understand. I think it can be difficult for the province to make a change. This is the billing act came in 2015. They don't need to change that. They need to change just perhaps the regulation that provides the discount. I think they do understand, but we go down there, and that's why as individual municipalities from the far north, we would go down and speak to the Solicitor General's office, and we've done that. I've done that with our staff probably 20 times over the 8 years, and explain things and how they don't work. But then we leave, and we're just one municipality out of 300 and over 300 that are policed by the OPP, as is Kenora and Pickle Lake. So that's in part why we formed a coalition to try and get some action from the Solicitor General's office, because we are outliers in the extreme, and it's only increasing over time. The population, as we act for a hub community for that all of us do, is the most marginalized population by any determination on social determinants of health in the province, and the amount of movement and outmigration from the First Nations for healthcare, for education, for retail, for everything, and for the court system, for the justice system, is only increasing over time. The northern airports were really only opened largely in the 1990s with scheduled flights. The passenger movements in and out are increasing over time, and the province needs to recognize this and the impact that has on our communities.
Darlene, let's take a look. I want to take a look at another community in Northern Ontario, Thunder Bay. The region has been at the center of missing and murdered Indigenous women and children. Recently, First Nations leaders in Thunder Bay were calling for the OPP to provide oversight of municipal policing services on reinvestigation of unsolved cases. Darlene, is there a similar pattern of broken trust between Indigenous communities and police in your community?
I don't think so. We don't have many comments that come in with regards to complaints about the police services here and the missing and murdered. Basically, we have a FILO office here, which is goes into investigating and has reopened one of the missing and murdered Indigenous women, and that is an Indigenous led office out of the Ministry of the Attorney General. Mm-hmm. And so the missing and murdered, there is work being done in this area and around Kenora. So we don't see too many complaints about the police services board here in not like in what's happening in Thunder Bay. I'm not commenting on that.
You don't want to, I don't want to put you in a position where you feel uncomfortable, for sure. May Renard, what have you been hearing from Indigenous communities in your community?
Well, I don't want to pretend that we don't have issues, but there's certainly, ours are much, they're not to the extreme that we hear about what's happening in Thunder Bay or what's been suggested happening in Thunder Bay. The Police Service Board, we have not had a lot of complaints. We actually just worked through our long-term strategic plan. There was a lot of community involvement, a lot of trying to engage with our First Nation communities. So it's not perfect, but it's certainly something that we're working collectively with. We've had a lot of positive projects that we're having one of two missing and murdered Indigenous monuments put up in Kenora this summer. There's a peace park that's a partnership between our First Nation partners. And so we still have a long way to go, but that's what we're striving for is, we work collectively and we work together.
And Mayor Lawrence, I think Ontario is such a big province, and I believe the last time, if my memory serves me correctly, there's 444 municipalities in this province. So many different places need different things. We're in election season, and we're hearing a lot of different issues being spoken about, depending on the, housing is something that seems to be affecting everybody across the board. But within your municipality, this is something that is affecting I imagine it's having a ripple effect on all the services in your municipalities. In your view, is policing cost an important issue to consider in the upcoming provincial election?
Absolutely. And let's be clear about one thing. This isn't about defunding the police. Unfortunately, our police services, and Darlene indicated, the police in Sioux Lookout, the OPP, work extremely well with all agencies, in part because of all the gaps in services that we have. We have no detox, we have no addictions treatment, supportive housing is limited, drop-in centers, whatever. There's so many gaps here, and the police work very well with them. But it drives the policing costs up through calls for service. And those policing costs are reflected in property tax. We probably have the highest property tax in the region because of our policing costs. And then we're trying to attract people to come here and fill many jobs in the social service sector, in the public sector, in the private sector. And cost of housing is one of the main detriments to moving here. So it goes hand in hand that we were advocate for fair policing costs and to fill in some of the gaps in services that exist in Sioux Lookout, which are now being, that work is being undertaken by the police.
And Darlene, I saw you nodding.
Yes, I agree. There have been, we've made a lot of efforts to lower some of the costs, but you can only do so much with lessening calls for service. Supportive housing, which is new to Sioux Lookout, has created lessening calls for service, and we work. The police work very well with the other agencies, like Mayor Doug Lawrence has said. We've also worked with the LCBO on closures for Sundays, and I guess it has helped them out too, because they had staffing issues. It's hard to find staff for, I believe, any organization across Canada is having that type of problem where staffing is an issue.
And
So there is a lot of work that is being done to try and work with all the agencies as well as the businesses. Yes.
And Mayor Lawrence mentioned this isn't about defunding the police. This is about your municipalities paying their fair share. In your view, is policing an important issue to consider in the upcoming provincial election?
Well, I believe it is. Especially in the two ridings. We have two of the largest ridings in Ontario. When you look at Minister Rickford will always talk about how large our riding is in Kenora. In Mayor Lawrence's riding, it's even larger, and the gaps in travel are significant. So the policing, I think one thing I'd really like to reinforce is we are not discouraged or unsatisfied with the level of service we get from the OPP. We have a tremendous relationship. We're very proud of the service. So that's not the issue. The issue is trying to find an equitable balance in terms of what that service costs. So I think as we move forward, definitely when, as the candidates, as the election is called, as the candidates come forward, we're going to make them aware of this unique situation. And, we need their support. The reality is the more support we have, the better chance we have of finding a fair and equitable solution to what we're trying to strive as three communities.
And Mayor Lawrence, you mentioned property taxes. What other areas of services could you use this money if you did get more funding?
Well, if you drove down our roads today, you wouldn't have to ask me that question. The potholes and the conditions and from the winter are dreadful. Certainly, infrastructure is primary. Recreation planning and programming for sure. It's we're always tight, and there's a pushback from the residents on high property taxes. We're very dependent on the residential tax base because we have very little industry or commercial activity, so it's really a burden. We have high employment in the public sector, so we have hospitals and schools that pay provincial payment in lieu of tax. So infrastructure would be key. That would be the first place, and also to hold the taxes at a reasonable level.
I'm from East Africa, and if you've ever been to Africa, the roads are terrible, and we call it the African massage because it's like, so maybe it's like the northern massage. Darlene, what would you like to see come out of this coalition in our last 2 minutes?
Well, I would like the coalition to be heard at the provincial level, the government of Ontario, and to be brought forward to the candidates in the upcoming election, and for something to be done. That's all, I guess, that can be done for now. We hope the government of Ontario can work with these three communities in the future.
Well, thank you so much to the three of you for spending some time with us. We really do appreciate it, and for sounding the alarm bells on what's happening in your municipalities. We appreciate your time.
Thanks very much.
Thank you very much.
The Agenda with Steve Paikin is made possible through generous philanthropic contributions from viewers like you. Thank you for supporting TVO's journalism.